Unless you've been living under a rock for the past week or so, you definitely will have heard about digital IDs. It was a shock announcement, I believe, by Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the UK, and it's been met with a pretty low appetite, to say the least. Now, there's been plenty of chat about these digital IDs. There has been for the past couple of decades, but obviously more recently, given this announcement, everybody's talking about it. But I don't really feel like the right questions are being asked. Now, I am a big fan of fully informed, uncoerced consent, which basically means I want the facts before I sign on the dotted line, so to speak. So today I want to have a chat with you about what these digital IDs could mean for us as parents and for our kids. Most people have been talking about digital ID in the sense of whether it's right or wrong, whether it will actually solve the issue of immigration, which is what it's reported to do. But I don't think anyone's really looking far enough into the future of the sort of impact on our lives. And as a parent, as a mum, and I know you guys, you'll be thinking about this in relation to your families as well. Keir Starmer has said that these IDs will be free but mandatory, and it will be necessary for your right to work. But what does this really mean, and what does it mean for our families and for our children? Many mainstream media outlets are covering this extensively, although without much depth, because, well, we haven't really been given much depth to work with. The Labour government haven't really said an awful lot about how this will work. But the main story is that these IDs will be available to all UK citizens and legal residents. They'll be mandatory for work and optional for pensioners and students not seeking work. The government pitch is that in time, IDs will make it easier to access licences and childcare and welfare and so on, which sounds really neat and tidy. It sounds like they're trying to make everything more convenient and easier. But we've heard this before, haven't we? It's the age-old playbook. We'll make life more convenient and easy for you. But actually, it means giving up some of your rights, some of your security and independence, handing it over to us, and we'll do the difficult bit for you. The truth is that digital IDs have been simmering in the background for quite a few years now. Tony Blair's government legislated for voluntary ID cards in the early 2000s, but it was scrapped in 2011 by Conservatives as costly and intrusive. Also, while we're talking about Tony Blair, I've noticed quite a lot on social media that Ewan Blair, his son's company Multiverse, may be quite closely linked to these digital IDs. And it's not a sort of wild step to say that there could be massive profit for him. I'm yet to find anything concrete that this is a definite thing that's going to happen, but there's no smoke without fire. The UK did used to have compulsory IDs during wartime, and this was abolished in 1952 after quite a lot of public backlash. Bearing in mind, 1952 was a number of years after the war ended. So this kind of points to this notion that, you give over your rights a little bit, it's very difficult to get them back again. Why did we continue to have these IDs right up until 1952? And why was it so difficult to get rid of them? It feels like this announcement by Keir Starmer, it feels like we've been blindsided with this sort of mandatory scheme that wasn't even in their manifesto just over a year ago. And if resistance killed the idea before, like in 1952, like I said, could it again? Or is this time a bit different? Is resistance futile? I feel there's been alarmingly little clarity on the rollout. Who exactly will have to have one? What happens if you don't have one? And everything in between. Now, there are quite a few people who've said, well, I've got nothing to hide. I'm a good person. So what does it matter? Only the bad people will be worried about this. But to them, I would say, don't be so naive. You're thinking about 2 inches in front of your face when you say stuff like that. You've got to be thinking about to be frank, the ulterior motive here. What is the purpose of these digital IDs? I think we can all quite comfortably say it's going to have little to no impact on the illegal working in the UK. So what is the other reason? What else could be planned for the data that's collected with these digital IDs. Now, again, we don't know much about them at all. Like I say, students and pensioners might not need them, but what about kids moving into the workforce? What about the kids who want a Saturday job age 12? Do they need one? Probably. But who gets to, as a parent, am I then kind of obligated to permit that? Can they get their IDs themselves without parental permission? How does that even work? And if IDs are inevitably linked to services like welfare, childcare, and driving licenses, then it stands to reason that, children will inevitably end up with these digital IDs. We've got a proven track record of an authoritarian political class in this country, and I worry about a government having so much access to my children's data. Now, again, people are like, well, they've already got an NHS number and a birth certificate and all of these other numbers and data collection points, but they're not all in one place. And that's where it gets messy and complicated, ironically. There's been a huge petition online about these digital IDs, and last time I looked, it was at 2.6 million signatures. And I'm sure when this video goes out, it'll be much more. But it basically demonstrates a huge swell of opposition. Personally, I don't think it's just about the principle of allowing all your data to be stored in one place, looked after by the government, who are, let's face it, not famous for being careful with people's data. But it's also about whether the IDs will even work and what they're going to be used for. Now, the IDs are being sold to us, as it were, under the guise of stopping illegal working. Those are not my words. That's the Prime Minister. But what any sensible person knows is there are already rules about working legally in the UK. You need a national insurance number. And as far as I'm concerned, people who are quite happy to break the law are not going to suddenly become worried about another law that's come in. They're going to continue to work illegally. I'm yet to see a reasonable argument for why this is going to be any different. Frankly, I think they're gaslighting us at best and lying at worst. But so really, I don't think it's necessarily about illegal working. It's about something bigger. And we all know what that is. It's about control. It's about efficiency, and it's about data consolidation. These digital IDs are intrusive. They are vulnerable to data breaches. They permit mass surveillance. And let's face it, they're not very British. I think people have legitimate concerns about a social credit system creeping in, like China has. Because once these IDs are linked to our jobs and services, healthcare, welfare, and all that stuff, it's easy to imagine that IDs become unavoidable for everyone, including children. I think it's reasonable to ask the question, are we going to get to the stage where a new baby is going to be assigned a digital ID at birth, that will have their NHS number and their birth certificate on there, and then in time their school record and everything else? I don't think these are unreasonable questions, and they require answering with honesty. But of course, there is worldwide precedent for these digital IDs. In Estonia, for example, they are seen as quite slick and efficient, but they are highly dependent on a digital infrastructure. And in India, there's been a massive rollout of these, but they're rife with data leaks and exclusion. People have really suffered because of them. Like I say, there's also China, who have digital IDs. It's tied to surveillance and online control, and the social credit system that I mentioned before. This is really frightening stuff, that this could come into the UK, which is supposed to have free speech and free thought. And of course, like I said, there is history of ID cards in this country as well, with Churchill scrapping them after World War II because they were too intrusive. But I'm wondering, which way will the UK lean? Will it lean towards efficiency and convenience, or control and surveillance? As parents, we are used to thinking about today. There's always so much to do. There's so many decisions to be made on a daily basis that it's quite difficult to think much further ahead than that. But we need to be thinking about the world our children will inherit tomorrow, as it were. So instead of just thinking, will my child need one? Let's look a little bit deeper at the what ifs that most of us probably haven't stopped to think about. Now, I mentioned Estonia before, and in this country, children get a digital ID from birth. So I wonder if the UK could quietly move that way. I mean, if every child's birth certificate and NHS number and school record and vaccination history were linked from day one, is that just efficiency or lifelong tracking? What does it mean if a baby is digitally tagged before they can even walk? Do we want our kids to grow up never knowing life without a digital footprint that the state controls? And who will manage a child's digital ID? Would it be the parents until the child is 16 or 18? Or would the state hold overriding authority? What happens in messy situations like custody disputes or parental estrangement or safeguarding cases? Who has the right to update, revoke, or access a child's digital identity? Then there's the creep of age verification. So the EU already plans to use digital IDs to prove if someone is over 18 for adult content. And we all know about the Online Safety Act by now. So on the surface, that sounds really sensible. But does this just go another step towards normalizing surveillance of children's browsing? Could a child's digital ID eventually be used to gatekeep social media, gaming, or even like physical spaces like concerts and cinemas and travel? Do we want that for our children? Is that going to help them to make decisions for themselves? Should that not be down to the parents to set those boundaries? Now, not that long ago, 5 years or so, we had a system that was implemented in the UK, and I believe many other countries as well, where people had passports. Now, I'm not talking about the passports that let you fly in between different countries, although they were used to restrict that travel. I'm talking about a different type of passport that you probably understand what I mean by. Now, some people had freedom of movement, some didn't, and these passports showed how quickly society can split between compliant and non-compliant. You're permitted to do this because you're seen as a good person who complied with what the government wanted you to do, and you just did it. So therefore you have access to this. You did not comply. You did not do what the government wanted you to do, and therefore you're restricted from accessing certain features of society, like even some shops or, all sorts of things that people were stopped from entering. Now, I wonder if these digital IDs could create the same divide between those who comply and those who resist, even for children. Will this be used as a manipulation tool, in a way coercing people to adopt digital ID by holding their kids to ransom? I don't think it's a massive stretch to say stuff like, in time, school places, school applications will be linked to a digital ID. But then, what if the parent decides they don't want a digital ID? They can't access the tool to apply for schools, or worse, because your parent doesn't have a digital ID, you're no longer eligible to apply for particular schools in any case anyway. I don't know. There's all sorts of frightening possibilities here. Now, if you decide that you don't want your children to have them, or the child themselves decides they don't want to have them, can you imagine, a teenager, for example, not being able to sit their exams or apply for university or take a Saturday job because they've decided not to opt in, or their family has decided not to opt in? Now, that's not freedom of choice, that's exclusion. And I think we need to be thinking much further ahead like this of how these digital IDs could be used to shape society in this way and put up barriers, potentially. I think we also need to be asking questions about data permanence. It's one thing for us as adults, but for our children, this could be really, really problematic. Childhood is about making mistakes and growth and changing. But if every little misstep or health issue or decision they make is tied to a lifelong state profile, can children ever truly leave the past behind? What happens when your past is permanently tied to your state-issued digital profile? Now, we can see some examples of this. We've all heard about it when young people apply for jobs and their employer just looks back on their Facebook page and looks at their old photos and like, oh, you went to that rally, or whatever it is, you're not suitable for us. That's quite a small scale version of what I'm talking about. But if employers have access to this information, do you think they're really not going to use it? I mean, can children ever truly wipe the slate clean of every stage of life if it's logged in one database? And then, of course, there's security and data breaches. A child's data being stolen is not the same as an adult's. It's their whole life exposed before it's even begun. Now, if we have these digital IDs now, at my age, I doubt maybe, I don't think so, it's going to be uploaded with every tiny little thing that I did since I was a child a few decades ago. But if a digital ID comes in now for a child being born today, that's going to keep a log of every tiny thing that they do. That's their whole life exposed before it's even begun. And what safeguards are really going to exist against hacks and leaks or misuse? A breach of a child's identity data isn't like losing a password. It could be their whole future compromised before adulthood. And I know this sounds very dramatic, and you might think, right, steady on, chill out. But I think these are the questions that we really need to be asking, because there's numerous occasions where there's been a data breach that has catastrophic effect on an individual's lives. We can see this all the time, especially when it comes to sort of banking and accessing money or whatever. There's data breaches, data loss is a huge problem that we need to be thinking very carefully about before we sign up to these digital IDs. Now, what about if the system fails? So, there's some sort of bug or an error or whatever, and you can't get an ID, or you choose not to get one. You choose not to comply for your child. So, tech barriers, admin errors, or just your own principles. Does that mean that this child is going to lose access to healthcare or schooling or future work? What is the fallback? Where's the sort of paper equivalent that we can fall back on? Is there even going to be one? Have they even anticipated any of this? We all know about cyber hacks and all these sorts of things that can happen. Is anyone even considering that this could happen with digital ID as well? Now, one of the main things that I'm going to be worried about is corporate and political use of that data. So it's not just a case of an individual's access to certain things or restrictions being put on their lives, but I want to be thinking about who is going to be even able to see this data, and to be frank, who is going to be buying it. Because as we know, that corporations already pay billions for consumer data. They say, it's going to help with the business, it's going to help sort of shape services and all this kind of thing. But nevertheless, data is being bought, sometimes without you even knowing about it or permitting it. So if IDs are linked to services and health, welfare, education, spending, that kind of thing, who gets access and for what price? And if our data is sold, who's going to pocket the cash? Is it going to come to me? Will it be sold under the banner of better services or targeted help, while actually fueling marketing and credit scoring or even insurance decisions? I mean, in politics, can you imagine parties shaping policy, not just from the polls, but from real-time behavioural data and tied to your digital ID? Will it make democracy smarter, or will it make it more manipulative? Because there's no two ways about it. Every government always wants more power and more control. And in order to get that, they want more people to comply and stop making a fuss. So are they going to use data to manipulate people into complying? I can't see a world where that wouldn't happen. I mean, are children going to grow up in a world where their data is a product that's traded without even their consent, without even their knowledge? Is this possible? I think, yes, it is possible. Now, as you can probably tell, I'm dead against digital ID. I think we've got too much intrusion in our lives as it is. I think we hand over too much data to these strangers as it is. And don't forget that politicians and the like, they are our public servants. They're not the boss. We're the boss. They're our public servants. So it's frankly ludicrous that we're going to get told what to do by them. And I think as parents, we need to be asking a ton of questions. And the main one is, what future are we signing our children into? Do we even get a say? I mean, we're told these IDs will make life simpler, but whose life are they really serving? Ours? Or the corporations and the governments who gain access to our every click, purchase, and movement? And what does that mean for the next generation growing up inside this system? So like I said at the beginning of the video, I'm a big fan of fully informed, uncoerced consent. And I urge you to be as well. It means no manipulation, and it also means doing your own research. So I would love to know what your views are of digital ID. What impact do you think it's going to have on our children? Will our children need to have one? Are you up for that? Do you think it's okay? Do you think it's not okay? I really want to know what you think. So please leave a comment below. Please subscribe, and I'll see you soon.